A quick check of the day's market action. The Lal Street failing to hold on to the highs that it clocked in early trade, closing near the day's low. The Sensex slipping 246 points from the day's high of 41,185. The Nifty giving up its hold over 12,100. Both the indices ended in the red. The broader markets underperformed and also closed the day in the red, except the IT index. All sectoral indices ended the day in negative territory. But the big story we've been tracking, the GST Council is scheduled to meet on Wednesday to take stock of the bottlenecks that have taken a toll on revenue collections. According to the agenda note for the meeting that's been accessed by CNBC-TV18, the Council will take cognizance of falling revenue levels and its deviation from the revenue neutral rate. Remember, the average GST rate is currently 11.8%, whereas the revenue neutral rate required to meet targets is 14 to 15%. Ahead of the crucial meeting, the centre has cleared the GST compensation of over 35,000 crore rupees to states and union territories. This is for the month of August and September. Remember, the centre has been facing heat from opposition-ruled states over pending GST dues. Earlier this month, finance ministers from Punjab, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi and Kerala had met with the union finance minister, urging her to clear the compensation as soon as possible. They did talk about fiscal pressure, and that being one of the chief reasons for states not being able to spend. The centre usually pays GST compensation to states in bi-monthly installments. Installment for the period of August, September and October, November are pending. The release of 35,298 crore rupees just hours after CNBC-TV18 reported that states had urged the finance minister to table the compensation issue as item number 2 in the agenda for the GST Council meeting. Remember, we also reported last week that the centre has about 46,649 crore rupees in its compensation kitty for cess collections until November. Staying with GST, ahead of the council meeting, West Bengal's Finance Minister Amit Mitras has written to the Union Finance Minister raising several concerns. Timsy joins us now with more. Timsy, what are the key issues raised by Amit Mitra?
Well, yes, according to the letter that West Bengal Finance Minister Amit Mitra has written to Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, he has very clearly cited that the current review of items under the GST exemption list for shoring up revenues is alarming, and government should not get into setting such a precedent for the council. Also, what he has stated that the current list of exemption is actually integrally connected with the daily lives of the common man, and also any tinkering would lead to undoing of the hard work that the council has done in the past while setting up the rates, while setting up what could be the exemption list even before the rollout. Also, with respect to the hike in GST from 5% to 6% or any other from 6 to 8%, he has said that this move will hugely be inflationary and further worsen the macroeconomic situation for common consumers. He has also said that imposing cess on luxury items which were reduced from 28% to 18% or are still under the 28% bracket and do not have a cess right now, this move will be highly regressive. He has also said that this will start a dangerous trend of imposing cess as and when the government feels that the revenues are declining, and this should not be exercised in desperation. Now, he has also said that any tinkering with GST slabs and items during these difficult times of macroeconomic situation would be highly detrimental and hugely counterproductive. He's also said, and I quote here, the solution of additional resource mobilization lies not in tinkering of rate structure, but lies in focusing on anti-evasion and fraud detection. So he's given the solution also. He's also pointed out that the measures that the government has been considering, which is widely reported in the media, is actually counterproductive. Let's see what happens when they meet in the council meeting on 18th of December. Back to you.
Well, then that 18 December GST Council meeting may not in fact see a decision on rates. That is because Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has hinted that GST rates and slabs may not be revised. Speaking at an event in the day, the minister said that there has not been enough discussion on the matter within the Finance Ministry. She added that while there may be revisions in rates after some time, it is unlikely to happen in the near future. She also tried to allay concerns regarding revenue mobilization, saying that the centre is working with states to boost GST collections. She went on to say that the prospects of an increase in GST mop-up is visible. Look, so at this point in time, what we are given to understand is that perhaps there will be no decision on a rate being taken at the meeting of the GST Council on the 18th. A review and a discussion on slabs and rates is probably likely to take place, but a decision may be pushed back. At least that's the indication they're coming in from the Union Finance Minister. But GST is the big story. Low GST revenue collections is the most important elephant in the room, and structural changes are needed to make the goods and services tax regime better. That's the word in from N.K. Singh, the chairman of the 15th Finance Commission. He said the Finance Commission will look at the tax regime very closely to figure out measures to boost revenue, make GST stakeholder friendly and move towards revenue neutrality. He also said that there has been one too many swift changes on GST and that the regime needs predictability and certainty if its future is not to be an issue. He also seemed to indicate that the Finance Commission may suggest fundamental changes to the way state compensation is calculated when it submits its final report in October next year. He said that compensation to states should be linked to some performance parameters or economic indicators like state GDP and not a flat 14% revenue growth formula. He also mooted the idea of an incentive structure to compute the compensation states should be paid. Well, let's shift away from the GST. Now, India's economic growth slowing to 4.5% in Q2, hitting the slowest pace in over 6 years. And our ratings agency Moodys has lowered its FY20 GDP growth projection for India from 5.8% down to 4.9%. Moodys believes the slowdown in the economy, which was earlier investment-led, has broadened into weakening consumption. Ritu joins us now with the details. Ritu, take us through the other key takeaways from Moodys.
Moodys has lowered India's GDP growth forecast for FY20 to 4.9% from 5.8% seen previously, as it says that what was once an investment-led slowdown has now broadened into a weaker consumption pattern because of three key reasons: rural financial stress, low job creation and liquidity constraints. And what has made all of this worse is the continuing credit crunch at the non-bank financial companies. Whatever steps the government has taken to arrest the downfall in this economic activity, they will only have a very limited impact, is what Moodys says. Now, these steps include, income support for farmers, monetary policy easing, as well as corporate tax cuts. What Moodys does say that there will be somewhat of a revival next year, but the growth that we'll see will be nowhere near the growth levels that we've seen in the recent past. This will, of course, in turn have an impact on the earnings on the auto sector. But what is worse is that it will also impact the household income and savings. That in turn could worsen the asset quality problem for retail loans, especially at private sector banks.
All right, Ritu, many thanks for joining us. Now, former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian has said that we are in a great slowdown and that the economy is headed to an intensive care unit. To tackle the challenges that the economy faces, the former CA has recommended a slew of measures. Lata joins us now with his assessment of the slowdown and the recommendations that he has made. Lata.
Well, actually, why is it a great slowdown? He divides the Indian economy's period from the year 2000 to two halves. 2002 to 2011 and 2012 to 2018, and just look at the numbers he gives. Investment annual growth rate 2002 to 2011 was 12%, fell to 2% in 2012 onwards. Before 2012, credit to industry alone grew at 16% annually. Now falls to minus, it's a contraction, minus 0.5%, only to industry. Corporate profits were growing at 22% in the first period, largely the first decade. Second decade, it is 5%. It is 2% corporate profit growth. Government final consumption expenditure, a big engine of growth, has not slowed much. It was 6% in the first decade. It's about 4%, 5% in the next decade. Direct tax collections were growing at 14% in 2002 to 2011 period. 12 to 18, direct taxes grow by 4%. IIP, only the consumer goods part, were growing at 9%, now 5%. Total bank credit grew at 11% up till 2011. 12 onwards, it's growing at 4%. Exports were growing at 16% 2002 to 2011, 5% post 2012. And imports were growing at 17%, now growing at 4%. And as he goes on to explain, that is why it's worse than the 90s, especially when you look at things like power. We're growing at a slower pace than we grew in even the early 90s. All three engines of growth, export, investment, and now lately even consumption, like the Moodys report says, have started slowing down. The main reason why there doesn't seem to be an end to the problem is that the cost of borrowing is higher than the nominal growth. Cost of borrowing for industry is something like 10.5, he says, in the first 6 months average. and the nominal GDP is 6.1. The difference is 4.3, which is very high. Nobody will borrow at 10.5% for a growth of 6%, and therefore the big problem, it's not just twin balance sheets but 4 balance sheets. To banks and NBFCs, to banks and corporates, you now have to add NBFCs in real estate. What is the way out? In the way out, there are don'ts as much as there are do's. The don'ts are, don't rely on monetary policy. The point he's making is that even if you cut rates, banks are not passing it on for 2 reasons. One, their NPAs are still high despite the cleanup, because now you have to add NBFCs in real estate. So they don't have enough capital. When they don't have enough capital for the incremental NPAs, they don't lend. The second reason why rate cuts are not helping is that the fisc is actually high. The fiscal deficit is not at 3.3 plus 3, 6%. It is actually at 8.8 to 9% if you add the off-balance sheet borrowing. And therefore, he says, the second don't is, don't try to expect this to be growing your way out with a higher fiscal deficit, because the fiscal deficit is already high. We have a high debt to GDP ratio. We should be increasing taxes, not lowering them. And therefore, the way out, and that is the most important contribution of this paper, 2 bad banks. One, to buy up all the bad real estate assets, and another to buy up the power assets. And then, of course, the other big thing he says is clean data. Let's get a good GDP number, because it's not gelling with other parameters. Put an Abhijit Banerjee or someone in charge and get a reliable GDP number, a reliable bad loan number with a good AQR done by RBI, and a clean number for the fiscal deficit. If you get these 3 clean numbers, maybe trust is restored.
All right, Lata, many thanks for joining us. So that's the prognosis of the state of the economy as per the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian, and more importantly, the remedy suggested for the road ahead. 2 bad banks, one for the power sector and one for the real estate sector, is what Subramanian is proposing. Countdown to Budget 2020 has begun, and just 46 days left for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to present her second budget on the 1st of February. The Finance Minister held pre-budget consultations with various industries and stakeholders. Stakeholders from the financial sector and capital markets presented their budget wish list. Representatives demanded a reduction in the GST levied on term insurance in order to increase penetration. They also highlighted the need for governance changes in public sector banks, enhancing credit offtake from bank capital issues, improving functioning and alleviation of stress among NBFCs.
There were a number of issues across the financial sectors which related to the NBFCs, HFCs, credit, ease of doing KYC, and then bonds market development. There were a whole lot of issues. We have all taken note of it. There were also taxation issues, suggestions.
Issues from the banking, insurance, mutual fund industries. So people give their suggestions. So everybody has given suggestions, and then they will take note of those suggestions.
So what were the key suggestions put
there are
forward?
quite a few relating to taxation, simplification, improving credit growth, improving efficiency of the financial markets, how to attract capital in the financial markets. So a lot of things.
Well, that's SBI Chief Rajneesh Kumar there on the meeting with the Finance Minister. Well, digital companies have also had their day with the Finance Minister. She begins preparing for Budget 2020. The key request from their end is a 3,000 crore rupee deep tech fund. They've also asked that employee stock options be taxed at the time the shares are sold. The discussion centered largely around digital infrastructure, the regulation of the digital economy, and ways to improve the ease of doing business for startups, the use of big data for public governance and gaps in infrastructure, and the taxation that impacts startup economy and the digital economy. They also came up with some other recommendations put forward, including incentivizing setting up data centers, data localization, a credit guarantee scheme tailored for startups, rationalization of the MAT rate, and even exemption in certain cases. Also, the creation of an agency to look into cross-border financial crimes.
Many of them have emphasized that some of the schemes that are on the anvil can be brought in quickly. Some incentives for large-scale manufacturing in the country.
Like the import duty structure, basically, is that what they're hinting at?
No, it's not import duty structure.
Then?
It's other incentives. There are a number of incentives. They have indicated about the manufacturing clusters, about some of the ecosystem for startups.
any demands?
What were the demands?
I think it would be appropriate you ask the industry representatives.
The finance
There was a lot of value addition, a lot of good suggestions have come, and we certainly look into them.
The advantage for India is its talent and its ability to scale, and we need to leverage it. So in services, we already have an advantage, and how we can maximize that. That's our focus area. So one of the things is that now for manufacturing company, already the corporate rate of tax has come down to 15% for new companies. Now, given the fiscal constraints and so on and so forth, in the special economic zones, we can definitely look at services company, the new ones, to be also given this 15% rate. The second point which we have said is that deep tech companies, startups in India need a push. Now the challenge there is access to capital. So can we create a deep tech fund which can provide access to this capital?
We find that the government has very serious intent to supporting Indian companies and making them big champion companies. At the same time, to get the global value chains to come to India, the large mobile phone global players, to make India a global hub for manufacturing. That seems to be the other strong intent. The most important thing is that the export benefits, which are in a question mark at the moment, we have requested that the air on that should be cleared, which is the MEIS scheme, which was brought down from 4 to 2%.
Key demand is that we look at the depreciation when it comes to R&D and creating new products. The other is that when Indian companies go and open offices of say 5 people or 10 people in US or developed markets, there should be an ease of sending money for paying salaries. On a personal taxation, because IT industry has a lot of people who are high valued, and to stop the brain drain, we need to reduce the surcharge or look at the limit. 75 lakhs and 1 crore is too small.
Well, startups with their budget wish list for 2020. We hate to say it, but we did tell you. CNBC-TV18 reported on Thursday that the SR Steel resolution would be a done deal by the 16th. And guess what? It did happen. ArcelorMittal and Nippon Steel have completed the 42,000 crore rupee acquisition of SR Steel as per the resolution process. SR Steel will now be run by a joint venture between Arcelor and Nippon. This will be called ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel India. Arcelor will hold a 60% stake. Nippon Steel will hold the other 40%. Aditya Mittal, the President and CEO of ArcelorMittal, has been appointed chairman. This will give ArcelorMittal, the world's largest steelmaker, presence in promoter Lakshmi Mittal's home market more than a decade after his first attempt. The move is also a big relief for banks that lent money to SR Steel.
Big relief not only for the banking system, for the IBC. This decision and this conclusion, it is very, very crucial and a very positive step, and for the Indian economy as a whole. So this is not only about the resolution of a very big, largest asset in fact under IBC, but also huge ramification going forward as far as the IBC process is concerned.
Well, that's SR. And staying with debt resolution, while the SR Steel resolution has been completed, Ruchi Soya's debt resolution may be delayed by about a week. Sources say Patanjali Ayurved has moved the NCLAT, seeking 7 more days to implement its resolution plan. Patanjali is believed to have moved the appellate tribunal after lenders refused to allow it more time. The SBI-led consortium was expecting the settlement of dues today itself. But on to the big national story. The backlash over the citizenship law has gripped several Indian cities. Today, college students across the country taking to streets, demanding the withdrawal of the contentious law that promises citizenship to Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Jains, Parsis and Sikhs from Afghanistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan. Also protesting against the clashes between police and the students of Delhi's Jamia Milia University and Aligarh University over the weekend. Nationwide protests. The management of Jamia Milia has said that the police had no prior permission to enter the campus and has demanded a high-level judicial inquiry. Students are seeking a CBI probe. The Delhi police has maintained that it exercised restraint. Our team of reporters on the ground get you the latest.
certainly was not anticipating this scale of protest that will take place in several campuses, because Jamia certainly has become the epicenter of these protests. There are students from other campuses also who have joined in. But the concern here largely at Jamia is that because of the violence that took place last evening, their issue that they have been protesting against for the last few days, they fear that that has got diluted and that it is no longer about their opposition to the Citizenship Amendment Act, but it is about they themselves, that they have become the centerpiece of this entire discourse around it, and that's what they are worried about. And that is the reason why the professors, the teachers of Jamia, the Vice Chancellor, they have been particularly emphasizing and telling the students to ensure that the protests that are taking place right now on the streets in this entire stretch of the Jamia road, they keep it largely non-violent. It is only about sloganeering, it's only about placards, and they have tried to ensure that it's only the students who are on the streets. But unfortunately, that's not the case right now, because the locals have also joined in, and that's what even the students are saying, that students, most of them are largely inside the campus. Who are there outside could be locals of this entire area, which includes Jamia Nagar, Shaheen Bagh, and other parts in this, of Batla House and others.
Well, I'm at Mumbai University here, where the students have staged a protest against the CAB bill that has been passed by the parliament, and of what happened at the Jamia Milia Islamia University and the AMU University yesterday. Well, all these students say they are standing in solidarity with students across the country who've been protesting against the bill, which they call is very divisive.
Last night was the night when I felt that we're not actually fighting to preserve democracy anymore. We're fighting to actually regain it. It's gone now. I think things that are happening in this are not like things that happen in a democratic state. They happen in a fascist state. It has happened already. I am here to protest to bring back democracy.
Action and violence done against students of Jamia, DU, in Lucknow, in Aligarh University, everywhere. The way they acted, the way they made it look like it was a violent protest, whereas it was a very peaceful protest. And students who were just inside, existing in the campus, they vandalized the mosque of Jamia, which is not fair. That's not how and doing a peaceful protest is our right. It's every citizen's right. It's called right to expression and speech. You're taking that right. With CAB, you are breaking right to equality on the basis of religion.
We want it to be revoked. Discriminatory against one particular religion, how can that be possible in a constitution? An Indian constitution is not allowed. All are equal under the law, under the constitution.
Even as protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act have taken place across the country, Chennai is no different, with members of the student and political community taking to the streets of the city, protesting two things: the act itself and the police brutality against the students of the Jamia Milia Islamia, which reared its ugly head in New Delhi yesterday. In fact, as you can see, hundreds of students and protesters have taken to the streets of Chennai in the center part of the city, at this locality called Chepauk, where they've been protesting against the act and, of course, the fact that it is inherently discriminatory and draconian. Most students I've spoken to have told me how the fact is that citizenship cannot be granted on the basis of a religion, and that is inherently the problem that we're contending with here. While the protest that you are watching right now, of course, has been called by the CPM and the Indian Union Muslim League, the fact is that a number of student protesters, as members of the citizen community here in Chennai, have also taken to the streets by way of protesting the bill itself, which is now, of course, an act. Remember, in Chennai and Tamil Nadu, it's not just the Muslim community that is being seen as a victim of the act itself. Sri Lankan Hindus, remember, haven't been permitted to seek citizenship in the country, by way of being immigrants. Not just that, members of the Northeast community here also took to the streets and in fact protested on Marina Beach for a brief while yesterday. Even earlier this morning, students of IIT Madras also began a protest before, of course, they have now made their way to Chepauk here, which is, of course, a neighborhood in central Chennai, to continue the protests. These students tell me they will continue protesting even as the evening goes by, voicing their angst and their displeasure against the act and the police brutality that followed.
Well, protests across the country, and we will get you more ground reports. Our reporters have fanned out across the country. We'll get you more from Kerala, from West Bengal. That's coming up in just a bit. But the Supreme Court has agreed to hear pleas against the violent police crackdown on the students of Jamia Milia and Aligarh Muslim University, provided the rioting stops immediately. Today, senior advocate Indira Jaisingh approached the Apex Court, requesting the court to take cognizance of the violence against students. Ashmit Kumar joins us now with what transpired in court. Ashmit, Do you believe the court is likely to take this up? Because the court also making it conditional that there should be no violence, there should be no damage to public property before the court takes this up.
Right, so the issue of police brutality against students has reached the doors of the Supreme Court. We understand that two senior advocates, Indira Jaising as well as Colin Gonsalves, they moved the apex court. They brought to the attention of the CJI-led bench that there had been police atrocities, that there were in fact medical emergencies, that the students were being treated, that bones were broken, and that this action by the police was excessive in nature, was beyond the CRPC and was unmandated by the current statutes. Now that is what the argument that had been raised was. Now what's interesting is that on one part, CJI-led bench of the apex court, they agreed to hear this application. In fact, this matter will come up for further hearing tomorrow, where there will be some degree of accountability as has been sought by the petitioners. But what's equally interesting is that CJI Bobde, as a part of his observations, made it abundantly clear that this issue is not one where the Supreme Court can be held hostage, where the Supreme Court can be bullied. So the CJI Bobde made it very, very clear that as long as there is arson, as long as there is rioting and there's damage to public property, no case can be made for this case to be heard on an urgent basis. In fact, he said that this matter needs to be heard with a cool head, and the only way the Supreme Court will proceed in hearing this matter is if there is a ceasefire of sorts, that there is no further damage to public property, there is no further rioting. That is the condition that has now been slapped upon the students, that they will now have to come good on. Tomorrow is, of course, when the apex court takes up this matter for further consideration.